Baruch Hashem, today's daf yomi is Menachos daf Samach Menachos 60. So today's daf yomi, Gemara, we're going to start on top of Mem Amid Aleph. The Gemara discusses Tana Rabbanan Sadin B'tzitzis. Let's say you have a linen garment and you want to know if you should put the tzitzis on it, the woolen strings. So Beishamai Potrin Ubeisel Mechayvin. Beishamai says they're exempt from tzitzis. The reason why Beishamai says it's exempt is Beishamai, as Rashi explains, does not expound smuchin. He doesn't expound the way we had learned in yesterday's Gemara, which said that because the mitzvah of shatnes is next to tzitzis, that means that tzitzis overrides the prohibition of shatnes, but Beis Shammai doesn't expound that, and so therefore you can't have shatnes on the tzitzis. And then Rashi says, why does it use the expression of patur and chiyuv, exempt and obligated, as opposed to prohibited and permitted? And he says because tzitzis is obligated on the garment. It's a chovas chavtza. It's an obligation on the garment, even if you don't wear it. And so therefore it's exempt from it. And so therefore, according to Beis Shammai, since it's exempt, it's considered to be klayim shelo b'makom mitzvah, since the tzadin with the tzitzis is exempt. So therefore, we're going to say it is klayim, not in the purpose of mitzvah, and you're in violation of klayim. So Basil says you're obligated in tzitzis because he darshan smuchin, because he does learn that shatnes overrides, that tzitzis overrides shatnes, and therefore you're allowed to wear them. Now Rashi continues and says that if the talis were made out of wool, it would also be prohibited to wear strings that were made out of linen, and the reason it talks about the case of sadin as opposed to a garment out of wool is because with the case of sadin, it would be impossible to have tzitzis without klayim, because the main mitzvah of tzitzis is tcheles, is by the tcheles, and tcheles is wool. Okay, so back to the Gemara. Tana Rabbanan sadin b'tzitzis Beis Shammai potrin Beisil mechayvin. Malacha k'divrei Beisil. The law is like Beisil that a linen garment requires tzitzis. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Eliezer bar Rabbi Tzadok, they used to be astonished or be upset. They would be shocked if they see anybody who's wearing a linen garment with tzitzis in Yerushalayim. And so Rabbi Eliezer is arguing. Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzadok is arguing with Beis Shammai, because you see in Jerusalem, if somebody walked around with a linen garment with tzitzis, they would be shocked at them. So, Amar Rebbe Imkain Lama Asrua. Well, if we know we pass him like Beis Hillel, why did they prohibit it? Why was it prohibited? So the Gemara is going to give 5 explanations, 5 different suggestions as to why they said you shouldn't wear the tzitzis on the linen garment, even though biblically speaking you're obligated. So Amalei Rava bar Rav Chana or Rava. Oh, I skipped. Amar Rabbi Imke Lama Asrua. So the first explanation is Fisha in Bekin, because they're not experts. Most people don't know how to darshan these smuchim and say that it's permitted to wear shatnes when it comes to tzitzis, and so therefore they're going to allow kolayim in general. And so Rashi says, well, if that's the case, how could, biblically speaking, we're obligated in something, and then rabbinically speaking, we override it? So this is, Rashi says, an example of what's called shev al tate. They said your rabbis are allowed to say, sit and don't do it, as we learned in Yevamos Daf Tzadi. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, limra be'asara v'nafko l'shuka u'mefarsim al milsa. So if that's the problem, people get confused. Why don't people aren't experts? Just have 10 big tzaddikim, put the strings on them, and let them go on to the marketplace, and people will learn about it. The Gemara says, no, kol shekain de metamu ilavan. No, if they'll do it, they'll say, what's going on here? These good people are wearing klayim, and they will get even more astonished. So the Gemara continues. So teach people that there's a distinction here. So therefore, the Gemara comes to the second suggestion. Gezerah mishum kala iman. So no, the concern is that maybe this has to do with kala ilan. Kala ilan is something that looks like tchelas, but it's not tchelas. It's like a dye, like indigo. And so if you're going to allow the strings on the woolen, the tzitzis on the linen garment, then you might come to put woolen strings that are not tchelas, which are just indigo, and therefore will be koyim, and it's not doing the mitzvah, and so therefore that would be a big problem. Mara says, but why is that a problem? It should be permitted. So it's no worse. These blue strings are no worse than if it was white strings, and so therefore, it's allowed. You can wear white strings, and we said earlier. We said in the Gemara on Daf Lamed Ches Lamed Beis that if you don't have tchelos, you can put white woolen strings. Gemara says no. Ella no. Kivin the Efshar B'minan lo. Since it would be possible to place it with the proper one, because since if you're using white strings, you could put white linen. So therefore, they're not going to allow you to put tzitzis on a linen garment, the woolen strings. Anytime you find a place of a positive commandment and a negative commandment, if you can fulfill both of them, it's good. Otherwise, if you can fulfill both, fine. Otherwise, let the positive commandment come and override the negative commandment. And so since in this case, you could fulfill the obligation by putting linen strings, therefore you can't put the woolen strings in this case. So the Gemara says, but we have a problem with that. So you're saying it's a gezerah because maybe it's the kala ilan. Why can't you just do your test? Check it out. Look at where they're dyeing the strings, or they're making the dyes for the tzitzis. Look at to see, do a test on them to see whether they're kali ilan or tchelas. The Gemara says, okay, different explanation. Third answer, why you don't put woolen tzitzis on a linen garment. Gzera mishum ti'ima. We're concerned about sometimes this testing sample, that what's going on is maybe you've done it like to test it out, but you didn't do it with lishma. Meaning to say maybe a person will buy the strings of the tcheles that were not dyed for the mitzvah of the tzitzis, but they were dyed to check the dye itself. And so therefore, since it wasn't done lishma, since it wasn't done with the right intent, it's not kosher. And so therefore, you're wearing shanes and it's not a mitzvah. So the Gemara says, V'lichtava diski. Why wouldn't they write letters and send them to all the people who sell tchelos? And they're writing the letters. You should know that this was dyed, that anything that's not done for the purpose of tzitzis is disqualified. And therefore you can't sell for the purpose of the mitzvah. So Gemara says, well, no. Adiski leikum v'lismoch. You're going to rely upon these letters. People don't read their emails. Nobody's going to know. They're not going to read the fine print. So Amar Rava, what are you talking about? Rava says we do rely on the letters. Hashta chametz v'Pesach v'Yom Kippurim dekares. Well, chametz and Pesach and Yom Kippur, which are kares penalties. If you eat chametz and Pesach, if you eat on Yom Kippur, and some chinana diski, and there we do rely upon letters. Hacha, but in this case, da'aseh ba'alma. Here in this case, where it's a positive commandment it's just a positive commandment to wear tzitzis. For sure, we should rely upon it. Kol shekain. For sure, we should rely upon it. First of all, it's not really a positive commandment here. It's because we're worried about the prohibition of klayim, which is a negative commandment. So that's a question that the Chazon Ish asks. So he says, you change the text to say the lo saseh ba'alma, meaning to say it's not a karet, it's just a prohibition. Ela marava. So a fourth answer, Rava says hamilsa amri v'itemer b'marava mishum de Rabbi Zera kavasi, and it was learned Idmar b'marava was learned in Eretz Yisrael. Name of Rabbi Zera, just likely. We're concerned is Shema Yikra Sadino Betolkim, and we're worried that your linen garment will tear, V'it Ferenu, and then you'll sew it up. V'Torah Amra, and the Torah says Ta'asev Umina Asoy, meaning to say you'll sew up your linen garment, and then the strings will not have been made lishma; they'll just be lying there. And then he'll want to put the tchelos on it, and we're concerned he's going to use the other strings which are already lying there, and it wasn't made, meaning to say it wasn't made for the purpose of tzitzis. It was just existing, and so therefore it wouldn't be done properly. And now we have wool and linen together, so that's going to be a problem. So that's the concern. The concern is it won't be done right, and then it'll be shanis. So Shara Rabbi Zera was sadine. When Rabbi Zera removed his tzitzis from his linen garment, because the Chachamim said you shouldn't do it, like we said. In Jerusalem, they were upset. So Rabbi Zera Amar, and what does Rabbi Zera himself say? He gives another answer. There's a fifth answer. Says we're concerned that maybe the tzitzis will go on, the tchelos will go on a linen garment that was meant to be used at night, and then it would be exempt from tzitzis. Because it says re'isimo, so you have to see the tzitzis, and you're not obligated to wear them on your clothing that you sleep in at night. And so therefore you'll be benefiting from kolayim, not for the purpose of the mitzvah, and that'll be a problem. Amar Rava Hamilsa Amri Vidmar b'Marava Mishmeid Rabbi Zera Kavasi. So again, Rava said this teaching I said, and it was taught in Eretz Yisrael in the name of Rabbi Zera, just like me. He shall beged uknafel shall or. Let's say the garment itself is made out of cloth, but the corners are made out of leather. Chayeves. Then it's going to be obligated in tzitzis because we follow the garment, not the corners. He shall or uknafel shall beged, but if it's the opposite, if the garment is leather and the corners are cloth, it's patur, it's exempt. My timer, what's the reason? Ikar beged ba'ina. We follow after the garment itself. Ravachai adil batir kanaf. Ravachai followed after the corners, not after the garment. Amarav Sechora, Amarav Huna. Hitil Labalos Shalosh. Vishlimo Arba Psula. Let's say you put tzitzis on three corners, and then you made a fourth corner there. There wasn't four corners. There was a garment with only three corners. And then afterwards, you made a fourth corner. It's disqualified. Mishum Tasev Uman Aswa, because the tzitzis are already on when it becomes a garment that's obligated with the four corners. Meisafei, the Gemara challenges this. Chasidim Arishonim Kimin She'argubal Gimel is challenged because the original pious people, once they wove a garment of three fingers, they would immediately put the tchelos on it. And so that's before it was obligated, because the garment of 3 fingers is too small. We're going to see in tomorrow's daf that it has to be enough to cover a child, or we'll see the different definitions, but it's certainly 3 fingers is too small. So the Gemara says, no, change the text. Ema kivan shopatzuba gimel. Once it came within 3 fingers of the end, so then it was obligated in tzitzis. They would put the tchelos on it. Gemara says, so do we really say this concept? You should make it and it should not be made. Va'amar Rabbi Zera, hitil umuteles kshera. Didn't Rabbi Zera say, in the circumstance, what is this case? Rashi says, he tell him mutelis. There are already 4 strings on it. It's a mutelis. It already has 4 strings. Vihito adal and you put 4 other strings on it. Kshera, bahani basrai. That the latter ones are kosher. Va'afagav da'adar paskinu kamai. Even though you then cut off the earlier ones, the garment is kosher. But in this case, you did it not for the right reason. Meaning to say it wasn't for the purpose, you didn't do it for the right reason. And still we're going to say it's okay. So that was cut off. And Amarava. So Rava says the reason why that doesn't prove that we don't say Tasev Omena Asoy is because since this idea of putting on 4 other tzitzis is a violation of Baal Tosef, of not, you're not allowed to add on to the Torah. And so therefore, it's not considered an action. Because since he's violating the Torah, it's not called an action. And so therefore, when you cut off the earlier ones, that was in fact the action of making the later ones. But in the case where you put it on a garment which only has 3 corners, then when you put on the 4th corner, it would be considered Tasev Omena Asoy. So, Rav Papa challenges this idea. How do you know that this person's intent is to add on tzitzis to it? How do you know that that's what's going on here? Dilma, maybe he's intending to nullify the original tzitzis. And so since he's not intending to add on, about Tosef Weka, there's no prohibition about Tosef. And since he's not nullifying the Torah, Ma'isa, there's an action here. And so since this action is disqualified, because at that moment, the Taoist was not obligated in tzitzis, it's going to be considered Tasev Omena Asoy. So therefore, he argues, Rav Papa argues, Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Masna Mashmuel, another teaching. So again, we're going to say, why is and since Rabbi Zera allowed this talis, then it's a question on Rav Huna, who disqualified in the case of 3 tzitzis. So I'm Rabbi Zera, I'm Rav Mas, I'm Shmuel. Tchelos ema mishum koyim va'afilu betalis p'tura. He says tchelos. Somebody puts tchelos on a linen garment. He's not in violation of koyim. Va'afilu betalis p'tura. Even if the talis itself was exempt. We'll see what does that mean. My talis p'tura. What does it mean? Even if you put on a talis p'tura, you're not liable for koyim. If you want to say that the garment is too small, Rosh Haruba is what we refer to, a garment which a child can cover the majority of his head and his body. If the adult will go out temporarily, it's obligated in tzitzis. If the child cannot cover the majority of his head and his body, even though the adult grows out with it once in a while, it's exempt. And so too with respect to koyim is the prohibition. My lenient koyim, and we said, what does it mean with respect to koyim? If you want to say so too with respect to the prohibition of koyim, but we said you're not allowed that we don't care about this thing of temporarily by koyim, meaning to say even a garment that's only worn once in a while, there's a prohibition of koyim. So too with respect to koyim on tzitzis, that we're going to say that if there is the obligation, you're liable, and then there's no koyim. But if there's no obligation, there is a prohibition of koyim. So we see from this brisa that a garment that's exempt from tzitzis, you're not allowed to put koyim on it. And so therefore, how did Shmuel say even a talis that's petur from tzitzis, there's no prohibition of koyim? Now, my petura, what does it mean it's exempt? It means lahatil hamutelis. When Shmuel says a talis petura, you're not liable for koyim, that means even if you put tzitzis on a garment that already has tzitzis, you're not going to be liable from koyim. And even though there's no mitzvah of tzitzis, nevertheless, not prohibition of koyim, because also the strings that you're not able to fill for tzitzis are going to be coming under the rubric of koyim, and they're allowed. Didn't Rabbi Zera already tell us this? He told him to tell us kshera. The Gemara says chadami called the chaver to eat. No, one was derived from the other. We just don't know which one was said first. All right, we'll stop here with our Gemara and Baruch Hashem.